ready to go.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Today we're working on a little Ryobi Weed Eater. And I say Weed Eater, but it came with a Weed Eater end, a pole saw end, and a hedger end. So it's Ryobi everything, I guess, this time. But it's got the same problem that most of them have that we pick up. They end up in a garage, and they get forgotten over the winter. And then when spring comes along, they pull the cord and it won't start. So we're going to do it the easy way this time. We're going to throw a carburetor on it and throw new fuel lines on it and call it done. For you homeowners out there who are doing your own, that's the only way to travel. Just go ahead and buy a carburetor. They're like 15 bucks on Amazon. Get a cheap carburetor, throw it on, call her done. So go ahead and subscribe. We'll wait for a second. No, I'm kidding. Let's take a look at the kit that we bought. Okay, this is the box that we bought. I mean, this cost $15. It came with a filter, a spark plug, a fuel filter, carburetor, fuel line, and the tool to adjust this carburetor. The only thing it didn't come with is these guys. And if you're doing fuel lines, you really want one of these. Now, I want to point out that in the beginning, when you buy them, they come like this. And it's got a little loop on the end, a little handle you can use to pull it. And it's really hard to hook it to the fuel line. But that's one that's been sitting around for a little while. Here's the one that I actually use all the time. And notice that on the end, I just touched it with the grinder and brought it to a crazy point. That way, when you're hooking it onto the fuel line, it's a lot easier. Now, it'll poke your fingers, and this thing's drawn blood on me probably 20 times, but it just gets a little pinhole, and that heals fast. So let's tear this carburetor off and get to work on her. I tell you, when you do these, it really is just this easy. I have a lot of practice doing them, and I've rebuilt a lot, and I've replaced a lot of carburetors along the way. But even if you don't have a lot of practice, this is not a complicated job. There's one, there's another. See, now normally I'd say loosen the cap first, because if there were gas in it, it would have come back. But I knew that there was no gas in this one because I'd already looked at it earlier. So now we're going to cut the line short and get them out of the way with our little pointy pliers. See, these aren't great, but they're not terrible. These fuel lines aren't as bad as I've seen by any means at all. Okay, that was fun. Now let's get started. Okay, now I looked at the new one, and I looked at the new gasket, and I'm not super fond of how the hole lines up on the gasket. So this carburetor is probably perfect, but the gasket leaves something to be desired. So we're going to steal the gasket off the old carburetor. And if you can't save the gasket, take the new gasket and make sure that the vent hole is clear. Because on a two-stroke, there'll just about always be a vent hole somewhere on the face of the carburetor. And if you don't get air coming through here, then you're not going to get any fuel, because it's positive pressure from the exhaust that pumps the fuel into the carburetor. Let's put our gasket on. And it's just like the old one was. It doesn't line up beautifully, but it does line up, and it gives us enough for air to get through. So very nice. Let's tighten her back up. There you go. And that's that for putting the carburetor on. And now we're going to do the fuel lines. And we use the fuel lines they gave us in our nice little kit. And I tell you, if you're doing your own, just buy the kit and be done with it. 99% of the time, the fuel lines are great that come in the kit, or they're good enough to get you a few years anyway. But what you want to check for is, you'll see this one came with 2 different size fuel lines. It's important that they fit nice and snug in the tank. And this little fuel line they gave us, well, it's a good fuel line. You'll save it for later. It's not going to be useful on this particular weed eater, or pole saw, or whatever you want to call it. So we're going to use the fat one twice. Let's go ahead. Whoops. Tell you, I'm just uncoordinated today, and I don't know why. Which is odd, because it's a Friday. It's the end of the week, so you would think that I'd be nice and smooth. So now we'll put the fuel line in this one. And it's really random which hole you put which line in if you're using the same size line on both holes. Now, because we got a nice sharp point on that one, you can see it ran through the fuel line really super easy. Now let's pull it back through very gently. And it feels nice and snug going through. And now we're going to stuff the fuel filter in and pretty much just take up our slack. And think about how you're going to hold the weed eater. So you want the fuel filter to be all the way on the bottom. This one. There we go. That looks pretty good. Remember what I was telling you about the fuel coming in? Now we're going to cut this. And then over here, we'll put a brand new taper on it. Pull our tail off and put it back through. Come on, little tail. There we go. Oops, that taper is not very good. You want to get a nice long taper going on this. There we go, guys. I know what it is. The reason I'm so fumbly today, so I was up at 5 o'clock this morning. They were digging around in my front yard, putting new water pipes in, the city that is, and they wrecked my check valve. So I was up and about before they were moving this morning, putting a new check valve in the second the sun came up. I don't think that came through far enough. I don't think I can grab it. Nope. Let's do it again. Put a new end on it. And as you can imagine, I got little pieces of fuel line all over the place in here. Little pieces like this from cutting little tails. And recutting little tails sometimes. There you go. That's pretty tight. Let's see what we got. Anyway, yeah, the city didn't wreck my check valve. They just broke the pipe leading up to it. And I didn't trust them to do it the way I wanted it done. So I went ahead and did it myself. And we're just that close to finished. Now, when you're doing this, don't sweat it. Now, the return line we just cut there. Remember, when you pump this, fuel should be coming in through the outside line, which is where we put our filter, and going out through the return line. If you do it and it's not working correctly, you may have reversed the lines. You know, God knows I do this a lot, and I put the lines on backwards all the time. So let's stuff a little fuel in her and give her a quick tune-up, and she should be good to go. I was pretty lucky. This gas tank looked really nice and clean inside right out of the box. Sometimes you get something short of a disaster inside the tanks when you buy them. You know, when you're buying them used. So now we've got gas in it. Oh, look at that. We got it backwards. That's all good. Yep, the lines are backwards. Like I said, you do this enough, you're going to put them on backwards occasionally. You don't let it bother you any. But make sure you leave yourself enough slack when you cut the lines to change it. Okay, now this is our incoming line. That's our return line. See, now I could edit this out real easy, but the way I figure it, if you're doing yours at home and you make that mistake, at least you'll feel a little bit better knowing that you're not the only person in the world that makes that kind of mistake. Okay, she's primed. Let's choke her up. Let's get some stuff out of the way and let's start it. Whoop. That's a self-closing choke. Okay. Okay, what we ran into was the ignition switch does not turn this one off. And when you're building these and you buy them used, you're going to hit stuff like that all the time. Now there's two things that might be going on. We've either got a broken line here somewhere or a bad switch. I should say three things. Or the line's off the coil. And if the line's off the coil, the way the switch works is it grounds it out. It grounds the coil. So let's tend to that. It's been a few days since I looked at this one. I had to put it off to the side while I waited for a switch to come in. But I went ahead and it turned out to just be the ignition switch. So I threw a new ignition switch on, and since it hasn't run for a few days, now we get to figure it out cold. Now I'm about 80% sure. So we'll choke it and we'll pull it a couple of times and off she goes. Or maybe not. Sounds like she's idling a little bit low. We're going to turn the idle up just a bit. We're going to try to. It's shaking all over the place. Just to turn it up, and we're going to check the low side of the carburetor. There you go. Let me turn a little bit more light on this bad boy. There we go. Now the low side is always the one closer to the motor, and the high side is the one farther away. But she revs up really nice. And there we go. Feels a little bit smoother now. Let's check it again. No, and as you can see, we went too far down on the low side. Let's put her there. I turned the idle way out, thinking I'd gotten away with it, but I didn't. Definitely not getting enough fuel at idle. Just turn the high out just a little bit, and then turn the low down just a little bit. This is pretty normal when you first start working on them. That sounds pretty good. Okay, I'm going to take this out and about and play with it for a few minutes, and we'll be back. Okay, that one came out pretty good. I ran her around with the weed eater end on it, and because I didn't want to cut any trees down with the pole saw end, and she came out really strong. Now it got a carburetor, it got fuel lines, it got all sorts of adjustments, but you can save yours the same way. When you get down to it, it's a really easy job, and now it sat for a few days and I started it again. She still sounds nice. So all you new people, go ahead and subscribe, and for everybody, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.